with Marie, and I'm Kim Mazer. I am an instructional tech specialist at St. Charles East High School. And Marie?
I'm Marie Legensky, and I am the LRC Media Specialist at Thompson Middle School.
And today we're going to take you on this journey of HyperDocs. So Marie and I have taught a district course on HyperDocs, and it's pretty comprehensive. And so when we were taking a look at how are we going to share all this information on HyperDocs in our 30-minute session, we decided to break it down so that we give you the need-to-know steps so that you can take HyperDocs on and adopt it for your own students in your classes. So as we move forward, we're going to take a look at what a HyperDoc is. And so a HyperDoc is this interactive digital lesson that transforms that design and delivery of a lesson. And so what we're looking at here is a way to offer students to work on their 21st century skills. This is a way that we can help to increase engagement and promote creativity. And ideally, it is our way that we are able to personalize the learning. So within our HyperDoc, we do have these layers of support that your students are going to take advantage of as they go through this lesson. And keep in mind that as we talk through what a HyperDoc is, we want to make sure that we are finding ways to connect with our students, because in this unique circumstance that we're in, we don't have that person-to-person physical proximity. And so because of that, we're finding ways that we can still build a community and connect. And so a HyperDoc is an excellent way for us to go about doing that. So let's take a look at what a HyperDoc is and what it is not, because this is very, very important for us to distinguish between. So if we're taking a look at what our HyperDoc is, we see that it is this transformative, interactive, personalized, engaging tool. It helps to facilitate the learning for our students. What it is not is a doc with a bunch of hyperlinks. And so when I had talked in the previous slide, I was talking about an interactive digital lesson. And so when you create a HyperDoc, you're actually creating a lesson that you are asking your students to take part in. So it's this journey or learning experience that they are going to start and stop, and you are going to have crafted that whole experience the entire way. So some things for us to keep in mind with HyperDocs is that they're a great mode in order for us to incorporate a ton of multimedia, which makes it very engaging for our students. You can also make your HyperDoc high-tech or low-tech, and that's dependent on what the purpose is for your HyperDoc and what your objectives are for the learning. You also want to incorporate a reflection piece, which we'll talk about as we talk through learning cycles. But remember that when you prompt students to reflect, that learning becomes sticky. And when that learning becomes sticky, they're probably going to hold on to that for a bit longer than if you didn't ask them to reflect on that process. And keep in mind that our HyperDoc is not just simply about assigning materials. Again, it's about delivering instruction. And that is why it is so important for us to kind of explore this during our remote learning today. And even when we are not in our remote learning situation, it's actually a great pedagogical approach. So let's take a look at some sample HyperDocs. Today, we are going to be focusing on the learning cycle of explore, explain, and apply. And so as you'll see throughout this entire presentation, there are hyperlinks that are hidden behind graphics, and we have text that's hyperlinked. As I click here and I click into explore and explain and apply, it's actually going to bring you to a template. And this template is going to allow for you to be able to create your own learning experience, taking on that learning cycle. So here we go. So here's a template that you are able to adopt and change and students through these stages or these steps of learning. So in the explore stage, as you can probably guess, you're asking for students to explore a topic, right? So you are putting information out there. They are going to take part in that experience, and they are going to glean a bunch of information from all of those resources that you've put at their fingertips. The explain piece is where you are asking for students to take notes or to start digesting that information. So as they're going through the process, they are starting to pull out information that they find is the most important. And then they're going to tuck that away for when they get into the apply stage. And here's where you're asking for students to take their learning and apply it so that they can demonstrate their knowledge or perhaps even their mastery of that skill or that concept that you guys have been working through. And so as we go back to our sample HyperDocs, we have two here that we have put here for you to kind of explore. And so this one is focused on Earth Day. And this one, again, is quite simplistic because what we're doing here with this learning cycle is that we're entering into these three stages of the lesson design. So in Explore, we have resources that students are going to watch or they're going to read through, and we're prompting for them to answer questions along the way so that they are actually taking part in that learning experience and they're not just idly watching the video. As we move into the second stage, Explain, that's where we're giving them different resources that we want them to begin pulling or digesting the pieces that are the most important to them. And then as we propel into the Apply stage, that is where we are asking for them to take their learning and do something with it. So in this case, we have them creating using Google Drawing to create a picture or perhaps a poster that shares different earth-saving tips with the world. So this is a way that they're taking that information that they gathered in our first two stages and apply it into their third. And that demonstrates their understanding for us to then assess. Then we have this add-on, which is Extend. And Extend is a really great way that you can scaffold this learning experience for students. So let's say you have students who are able to work through the three stages quite quickly, and they are then going to be encouraged to take on the Extend option. Or let's say that you have students who are actually quite intrigued by the topic or the content that you're talking through, and you might not have enough time to talk through this final resource that you found. You can offer it in as an Extend option. So when you build your interactive HyperDoc, you allow for these different stages and for students to take control of their learning, and they kind of are put in the driver's seat. This other example that we have here is going to look a bit different. We're still following this idea of Explore, Explain, Apply, but now it becomes Wonder, Play, and Review. And as you can see, this is formatted differently. Keep in mind that both are using Google Docs, both are using the simplified learning cycle of Explore, Explain, Apply, but they look quite different. And so again, this goes back to how you are crafting or designing this experience for your students. So let's go back and take a look at how you begin to craft your HyperDoc. What does that creation process look like? And so here we have 5 steps that you can take part in. And I'm going to go through and kind of break it down a little bit. And so when you are engaging in this design process, it's actually allowing for you to create a more personalized or differentiated approach to your students' needs. And so let's go ahead and take a look at determining learning objectives. Before I launch into this, I just want to see if there's any questions so far, Marie.
No, we're doing really well. Yeah, we're it's about 12:12. So
excellent.
Okay.
Excellent, thank you. So for our learning objectives, here are the things that we want to consider as we're crafting our HyperDoc. So for our audience, what's our grade level? If you are working with early education, you're probably going to develop a HyperDoc that is going to be a platform that you will start with in the class and then you'll leap into something else. As your students are in higher grade levels, that your HyperDoc could take on the form of a demonstration piece, or you can then build it up where students are independently accessing that HyperDoc and taking part in that learning journey. For your content area, HyperDocs are a great way to use cross-curricular lessons or projects. You can create that within your HyperDoc, and it's also a great way for students to collaborate. For the length of our lesson, you want to think about, do you want your HyperDoc to be for one class period? Do you want it to extend over the course of 2 to 3 days? Is it going to be an overarching platform that students will access through an entire unit? So that's what we're talking about when it comes to length. And then when we're looking at our standards or our objectives, you want to think about, again, is it one single teaching point or is it an essential question for a unit? And for our outcome, you want to think about, okay, are we asking for students to just explore a concept? Are we asking for students to talk through things collaboratively? Is the intention that I'm going to assess student learning? And so these are some things that we want to think about when we are determining our objectives. As we move forward in this HyperDoc creation process, we want to take a look at the different learning cycles. And again, I want to show you that as you click, you will be able to launch into these different templates for the learning cycles and adopt them and create how it fits your needs of your students. So we were working on Explore, Explain, Apply today, and the HyperDoc model is a bit more traditional, but as you can see, we have a lot more steps that are involved with this. So I highly encourage you to take a look at these learning cycles and think about what's the best approach for your students. And just a reminder that if your students are new to HyperDocs, you're probably going to want to start with a simpler approach. Get them used to what a HyperDoc is, how they enter into that learning process, because it is quite different. And then you can begin to build from there.
Hey, Kim, can you put your slides in present mode?
Absolutely.
Or they're a little bigger. Thank you.
Better?
Yes.
Great. Okay, cool. So when you are picking your learning cycle, you really want to think about what is your lesson's purpose, right? And so that's where you're going to kind of go in with this lens of, okay, which one is going to meet the needs of my lesson? Which one's going to meet the needs of my students? And how can I provide the best supports? And keeping in mind that always adding that reflection stage is always going to be of great benefit. Now we have to start thinking about how we package our platforms. And so here are some possible ones that you can use. These are all Google apps, but you also have to keep in mind that you can use other Web 2.0 tools. But for the sake of keeping things simple and trying to get our feet wet with HyperDocs, we'll focus on our Google apps in order to begin our initial building process. And so as you click on these, you'll be able to see some examples. And so actually, I am going to take you guys on a little journey. So I'm going to exit out of the present mode, and I want to take you to a couple of different options here. So for docs, okay? So if you are creating your HyperDoc using a doc, you can see here that it's kind of like a simplified website. You can create tables, you can adjust the background color, you can create these interactive pieces that you can, like these game pieces that you can click and drag. And so it's a very kind of clean approach. Some limitations that we have is that, see how we have watch this video? I can provide links to videos. I can provide links to different external tools. I cannot embed when we're using a doc. So that is one of our limitations when it comes to using docs. And also that your viewer has to go to other sites and they're not going to remain in that HyperDoc for the entire view. The other one we have here is for slides, right? And so for slides, we have, if you think of slides, it's kind of like a deck of cards, or maybe it's like a packet of papers or a packet of instructions that you might have given your students if you were in person. But now students are able to go through and explore these different cards or papers that you might have instructed them on. So here's an option. It's quite neat. You can actually create an interactive activity for students on your slide, right? So we have text boxes. You click and drag, and they are able to then categorize depending on what the directions are. The cool thing about slides is that you have more of free reign over design. So you can see we can insert these graphics. We can embed a video, right? So it's not a link. I can watch the video in here. I can gear up the video to start at a certain time and end at a certain time. So that's a really cool feature that we have. But when we think about grading or feedback, you have to have an idea of how you're going to offer that. Do you want to go through each single slide to offer feedback? Or will you have students submit their answers in a form that you link at the end of your slides presentation? And then you're able to go through the answers on a Google Sheet, right? All collected in one space. So that's something to consider when you're selecting slides. For Draw, this is going to be quite neat. It's very comprehensive and it's one initial view. So this is where you can take one plain view and you can make these intricate, kind of detailed directions that guide the students through this process. We do have the links here that will take students out of this drawing, but the cool thing is that you can also use drawings as a way for students to show their learning by modifying. So here is an example of how you can take a drawing. So this is a Google drawing, right? And students can modify the drawing in order to show their understanding. So this is a really cool interactive piece. Another one we have here is, let's say you are using we're using like different mathematical skills, and you're asking for students to draw on this image where they believe that the angles should appear. And that's another way that we can go ahead and use drawing in order for students to illustrate, demonstrate their learning. Sites. So for sites, it's just building that Google site, right? And so it becomes a series of steps. You have graphics embedded throughout. You have the links. You can break it up into different parts to take them through that. You can package a larger unit using sites. The perk is that you create this visual flow. And again, you can embed a Google form to collect student responses or ideas along the way. And then finally, we're talking through maps. And so with maps, this is where you can actually take your students on a journey. They can place markers on a map. The markers can contain links or video or text that can take them through this journey of places rather than of slides. So this is a great resource that I would highly encourage you to take a look through, as you can see how to build your HyperDoc on a map. So some cool ideas here, right? We've got a bunch of different platforms that we can use, and a lot of things that are going to kind of change that learning game for our students. Now, the final piece is building your workflow. So take into consideration all of these different prompts that we have here. Think about, how are you going to share your HyperDoc with your students? How are you going to provide feedback? So how are you going to interact with your students? How can you collect your students' work? Are you pushing this out through Google Classroom? Are you sharing it via an email? Are you using another LMS like Schoology? And how many clicks is it going to take for your students to get to that next step in your HyperDoc? Because ultimately, you want to keep the number of clicks low. So it should be 1 to 2 clicks to get to the next activity and then return back very easily to that HyperDoc. Okay, so these are some things to keep in mind. These are the 5 steps. And Marie is going to take us through what that design process looks like.
Okay, give me just a second to present my screen.
Absolutely.
And I am ready here. Okay, so I'm taking over here on slide 11. So talking about, she went through those first 4 steps with you in creating the HyperDoc. And now I want to talk about some of the resources you can use for designing it. Now on the left here, these are all linked as well. This is a fabulous document that I think Megan Cannon was the creator of this one. She's one of our D303 LRC directors. And this really kind of gives you some options for font choice and logical, like the links that you want to put in different images and media and how you want to create it. So this is engaging to students. It just doesn't look like, a worksheet that has some links on it. This is also linked to Twitter. So if you are looking to follow lots of teachers who are willing to share their work, and Teachers Give Teachers, that's the platform that the HyperDocs ladies use. And then EdTech tools for HyperDocs. This is just kind of cut off here because I took a screenshot, but if you go through, it gives you all kinds of different tools as options for you to use within a HyperDoc. What I really want to focus on is the HyperDocs website. Now, you'll need to know that the HyperDocs website recently has done a big makeover. So it's not completely all in there and linked just yet. It's actually terrible timing for Kim and me, because as we were going through and planning this, it looks a lot different if you've ever been to this website before. What I'd like you to notice here is that there are lots of templates and samples available. Now, the templates that they have are mostly the same templates that we already put in our slideshow. So the basic HyperDoc lesson, which is what people usually use. We kind of focused on this Explore, Explain, Apply today because it's a little bit shorter. But if you go into the basic HyperDoc, you're going to see that Explore, Explain, Apply is kind of the heart of that basic HyperDoc. You'll also see that they're on the right-hand side, they have a sample. So they have a HyperDoc that's already created using each of these learning cycles. So if you were a language arts teacher or English teacher and you wanted to do a creative writing challenge or whatever you are teaching, you could always take a look and see if it's something that you could use, and you'd be able to read through it and file, make a copy to make your own. What you don't want to do is request edit access, because whoever is the creator of this HyperDoc, they'll be getting millions of emails, right? So you want to file, make a copy. Now, HyperDocs that are on the site and with Teachers Give Teachers, they really believe in sharing their work and making it all free. So you don't have to, worry about, using someone's work. I noticed that on this one, they don't have who created it, but a lot of times you'll see on the bottom, it might say who the creator was, and I encourage you to keep that, or, say modified from, just kind of give them a little shout out there. So these are the learning cycles, the template. If you were to go to the template, you would do the same exact thing. You'd have to go to File and make a copy. Okay. So File, make a copy, and then it'll pop open and you'll be able to edit it however you'd like. So this goes through, the only other template on here that we did not put in our presentation is the hero's journey. So you are free to look at that for time. I'm going to skip over that one for now though. And I also want to show you under Find is samples. Now in the past, if you've ever been to a HyperDoc website before, it used to be teachersgiveteachers.net, and there's thousands of HyperDocs available on there. I was on a webinar the other night and they were explaining how it's not all completely copied over just yet. So if something leads to, if you don't think there's a lot available in there, eventually there will be a place where you can search. You'll notice right here, there's nothing where you can just search under a certain topic. It's going to take you to a Google Drive and you'll see a plethora of HyperDocs available in there. And you can kind of look through, and just like the other ones, if you're like, oh man, I teach California 4 regions, you can take a look at it. If it's something that interests you or something that you would like to use, you would open it up completely and do, copy, file, make a copy. Okay. I know I'm rushing through some things here, but eventually there will be, if I go back to the templates, or maybe it was the homepage, sorry, because it's a brand new site for us here. There eventually, excuse me, there is going to be a place like there was in the past where you could search. So let's say you're teaching fractions, instead of kind of digging through all the math ones in that file, you can just search for it. I found it last night. Kim, do you know off the top of your head where that was last night? The search?
No, I think that there's.
Okay, I apologize. Maybe they took it off. It was on here at one point, but there was a search button and it led to nothing. So that's probably why we're not seeing that on there right now. So this is a really great resource to get started. So Kim took you through all of the layers of creating a HyperDoc, but I want to talk a little bit about remixing a HyperDoc. Remixing a HyperDoc is basically taking a HyperDoc that's already out there, that someone else has already created for their students, and remixing it, recreating it, editing it to make it your own, to make it so it fits for your learners' needs. So using that same HyperDoc that Kim talked about earlier with the Wonder Play review, you can go through, it shows you all the different, kind of talks through each of the different sections of this HyperDoc and the flow of it. But you need to kind of think about, how would this work for my students? How can I adapt it? You'll notice in this second, in the practice, form a small group of 3, perhaps with remote learning. You might not want to have that. So that might be another way of kind of looking at how can this meet the needs of my learners at this time? So I'm just kind of thinking through that. And that's, again, when you do the file, make a copy. You remix it however you need it for your students. All right. And the last couple of slides here, we actually included a couple more resources. So if you want to dive a little bit more into this is typically a 30-hour course that we teach. So this and a half hour was really brief here. This is Halisa Heifel is one of the 3 HyperDoc creator ladies, and you might know Matt Miller from Ditch the Textbook, and Holly Clark from She's Really Googly, and now she's pretty Microsofty too. So they had a webinar a couple weeks ago, and I think they've had another one since then. And then this is a little bit shorter. I think it's like about 9 or 10 minutes, where there's a tech guy, I forgot his name, who is talking about HyperDocs. And then here are some resources that are text. So going into some blogging, and then this is from the HyperDocs website, the Academy that they call it now, and they have some courses there that you can take. Okay, so those are the things that we wanted to cover today. Are there any questions, Kim, in the chat? Kim, are you there?
Sorry.
Oh, okay. I'm like, is anyone here? Because I can't see anything. So.
No, we don't have any questions in the chat.
Okay. All right. Well,
but, if any of our guests would like to ask a question, feel free to unmute your mic and you can ask now. So we are also available as supports even past our time today. So if a question arises in the coming weeks, please feel free to reach out. And this recording will be available to you on the District Remote Learning site. And we do ask that you take the form to give us some feedback, because it's always helpful for us to have some feedback to work off of. So I'm putting that form in the chat one more time. I know Marie did it at the beginning. So we really appreciate you coming by and spending some time with us on this lovely Wednesday afternoon.
All righty. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.